Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. You guys know what time it is. Time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And in keeping with YouTube's new policies, I want to state up front that this is purely an educational video. I do not endorse any sort of illicit substances. I don't endorse anyone engaged in any form of illegal activity, nor any sort of reckless or health-harming behavior. So this is purely an informative video about a current events going on where apparently Greg Doucette has discussed MattDoesFitness. Now let me give you guys a Greg imitation.
Hey guys, it's Greg Doucette here, and I just want to let you guys know up front that I'm not a doctor, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
So let me go ahead and put on my +5 hat of speechcraft and let's talk about this. Alright guys, you know, as a lot of people have noticed, I was one of the original guys on YouTube years ago who discussed the whole fake Natty thing, but the truth be told, I've backed off of it a lot, and people say, well Jason, why do you? Didn't want you kind of a crusader for this? Not really, it was just I thought it would be interesting to talk about it and tell people about it. I've actually been sued over it by a fake Natty who I legitimately believe uses gear, and still used gear back then, probably still does today. But I've been sued over it, I've got death threats, I've gotten hate over it, and yet no one has learned anything. Right? Nobody has learned anything. And I kind of, the way I feel about the whole fake Natty thing at this point, after all the information I gave you guys on how to easily spot fake Natties, the fact that anybody out there still needs to even ask me if a person is natural tells me that I got sued and got death threats and got hated on literally for nothing. Because nobody is any wiser, and I feel like the only way most guys are going to learn is after they get basically ripped off for a few $1,000s. Once they spent $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on supplements, worthless body part split programs, meal plans, all this stuff from these fake Natties, then they'll be wiser, then they'll be more mature, and then they'll realize, wow, I was really stupid and I got conned. Then you will be a wiser and better person for it. You know, it's going to cost you a few grand, but you know, I'm kind of at the point to where people who aren't wise enough to listen to what people have said, they kind of deserve to be ripped off because it's the only way they're going to learn. Like they actually have it coming, and I know that's a terrible thing to say, but I mean, at this point, I'll give you guys a perfect example. If you, at this point in the game, have been around the lifting world long enough and you still think, say, Jeff Nipples is natural, if you still think Jeff Nipples is natural, you are ignorant. You are ignorant. You are not a real lifter. You've not been around real lifting. It's just stuff that even people say in my comments, all the real lifters who use gear on and off, they all joke about that. That's a perfect example. If you think Jeff Nipples is actually natural, when even you know that he sells products that don't work and sells garbage workout programs, like you can look at them and tell they're not very well written, sells products that science says don't work, right? And you want to buy that stuff because you think he's natural, you kind of deserve to be ripped off at this point. Then you'll wise up and realize, oh yeah, this kid's been using gear all this time. But the point is, Greg went in kind of hard on MattDoesFitness, and it's kind of what I've told the people. What is it I've been saying for a long time? It's not even hating. It's that guys who've been in the iron game a long time, we know gear use when we see it. It's not one of those, oh, we're looking for it. We don't have to say, oh, does this guy look like he's on gear? No, we say, yeah, that guy's on gear, that guy's on D-Bull, that guy's on Deca, that guy's on Trend, as they walk by, okay? It's like noticing that girl's a blonde, that girl's a brunette, right? It's plain as obvious. It's obvious as the nose on your face. Once you've been in the game a long time, it's blaringly obvious. That's not hate, that's noticing. How can you not notice? Like, that's almost the point that we make, the more experienced lifters, of how can you guys not tell? Are you really that stupid? Are you really that stupid that you can't tell when the guys in your gym go on or off a cycle? It's not like immediately obvious. It just does. So the point is, he looked over and he went to investigate MattDoesFitness, and Greg looked at him and said, oh, well, yeah, he's obviously uses gear. It was just his immediate response. And Greg is not someone who you can call a hater. Greg is pretty well a champion in multiple endeavors. Guy's strong, guy's jacked, knows a lot about gear. I mean, let's be realistic here. He knows a lot about training. He's got some pretty legitimate bona fides. Not exactly someone who I call a hater. He's basically he's way more accomplished than Matt is, right? He's more accomplished, so he's not hating on him. He's just calling it like he sees it. And that's exactly the case. He looked at him and said, well, but he's not claiming to be a natural. So then he went and watched his video explaining why he was a natural. And basically Greg was offended by the lies. That's the way he more or less worded it, that he was offended that the guy would just lie outright like that and make up nonsense. And what were some of the highlights of what Greg noticed? And Greg is right on this stuff. He only got one thing wrong about the biochemistry and blood work, which we'll get into in a bit. But one of the things he pointed out was that, Matty wasn't a novice lifter. Matty had already been an athlete, had some training experience, and all of a sudden, inside of 1 year, put on 50 pounds. And as Greg said, he's going to assume it's 30 pounds of muscle. 20 pounds of fluff weight, 30 pounds of muscle in a year, which nobody's ever done natural. And then all of a sudden, his squat is like 600 pounds. His deadlift is over 600. He was a sub 400 squatter, sub 400 deadlifter, and he broke 600 in both with 50 pounds of weight gain in a year. Okay. Not only is that phenomenal genetics, that's probably not conservative amounts. Like when someone does something like that, that's not someone who did a little small cycle. Right? That's not someone who did a little small cycle. That's not someone who ran 500 milligrams a test. Only a genetic freak, an absolute genetic freak, would get that sort of response from a modest amount of gear. That's someone who went pretty hard. And kind of the point he made, he's like, you need to understand what 30 pounds of muscle is. It's like, as he pointed out himself, he says people get shocked when they ask him how much muscle has he gained from using stuff. He's like, about 25 pounds. But as Greg pointed out, he was pretty well close to the natural limit for his frame and for his genetics. He peaked out, trained for quite a few years natural, pushed himself to pretty well, very, very close to, if not at the natural limit for his frame. I don't think that's unreasonable. I believe Greg probably did that. And I would say Greg is probably a genetic freak on top of that. I mean, realistically, look at his lifting numbers and then the fact that the guy goes on and does IFBB stuff. You need to understand that Greg is not a genetically average dude. All right, genetically average dudes don't bench press 500 pounds raw. All right, genetically average dudes don't get their deadlift over 700 pounds raw when they only weigh like 200. All right, that's not normal. Even on drugs. He's already in that top 1%. Right? He's already in that top 1% in terms of his genetic potential. Then the guy obviously trains hard. His training ethic is pretty ridiculous. From what I can see, Greg actually is legitimately good training ethic. Like, no joking, no BS there. He really is. He trains hard. And it's very obvious that he does. And then he went on gear. But he has pointed out he's only gained about 25 pounds of muscle. And people are like, really, all that stuff you've used for 25 pounds of muscle? Yeah, that's how it works, guys. What you need to understand is these mass monsters that you're seeing out there aren't just using anabolics. They're stacking tons of other stuff, all the insulin and large amounts of growth and IGF-1 and all this other stuff with it. To put on 25 pounds for someone who's already pretty well built a base, they didn't just start using stuff sooner than they should have. To put on 25 pounds of muscle, of actual real muscle tissue from anabolics after you've spent several years building a really good base is a lot. That's a lot. People need to understand that is a lot. Most of you out there, unless you started way before you should have, and so you could have just built muscle naturally, over 20 plus pounds of muscle from using stuff, of real muscle, is actually quite a bit. That's quite a bit of muscle. And you need to keep in mind, most of you guys aren't going to put on more than 25, 30 pounds of muscle, even natural. Like from where your starting point is, somewhere in that 25 to 30 pound range is probably like your lifetime muscle gains, unless you're going to get fatter and push it up a little bit higher while staying fat. And you're going to lose some of that if you diet down. So you're getting pretty well to your limit of clean. And then to go on gear, you're basically doubling again what you could have gained from a lifetime of lifting at that point. That's a lot of muscle. So that's kind of the point that he's made. That's what he's gained on it. And you have this other guy who basically hitting numbers that Greg is saying, look, these are the sort of numbers I was hitting on squatting and deadlifting after I went on gear, after building a base clean for years and years and years. This guy's still hitting squat and deadlift numbers very comparable to what I was doing. So you've got that, and then the fact that he gained something like 30 pounds of muscle weight. Okay, that's not natural. That's not natural, because we come back over to that point. Most of you guys out there, from the day you walk into a gym, over the course of your lifetime, clean 25 to 30 pounds of muscle. That's what you can expect is a really, really good outcome. Like, that would be phenomenal if you could gain that clean over the course of, say, 5 years. All right, this is being done in like a year. As someone who's not starting, as someone who's already played sports. So he already has somewhat of a base going already. He already has some musculature. So again, that's a big dead giveaway. Then the amount of strength that he gained in that time period. And then the other thing that he points out of the bold-faced lie of coming in and saying, well, here's where my testosterone is, so this is proof that either I'm not on right now because my testosterone will be jacked way up, or my testosterone will be really low because I'm off. Well, there's some problems with that. Number one, his test levels are low. He's basically 330 nanograms per deciliter. The normal range is 300 to 1,000. Now, 1,000's an odd man out. Like, people over 800 are very, very, very rare. Because 600, 500 is actually considered pretty good. That's good. Like, you're peak, you're almost optimal at that point. 330 is borderline low. Now, that's the other point that Greg made. You're telling me that a guy who sits with it at the low end of average, who's almost getting close to clinically low, like if his testosterone levels dropped another 12% or so, he could qualify for a prescription. And like up there in Canada, they would pay for it. It would be covered. His medical would pay for it. That's how close he is to needing TRT at 330. All right, that's not a healthy amount. So you're telling me that a guy with borderline low testosterone put on 30 pounds of muscle in a year and hit a 600-pound squat? That's kind of a call. It's like, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. And then, as he pointed out, he lost size and strength after he went into bodybuilding after doing powerlifting. So it's like, you mean to say that when you switched to bodybuilding style training, you lost muscle? Or did you come off a lot of the gear that you use? And it doesn't even mean he's clean. Like, just if he had to reduce the amounts he was on, because you guys need to understand, man, to hit a 600-pound squat, he might have been going pretty hard from where he was. He might have cut down to a third of what he was using, and then he loses size. Okay? Now, as Greg pointed out, the testosterone is not necessarily an indicator of anything. That could indicate that he's using a low dose of testosterone. But he's also suppressed. If that's his natural production, why is his testosterone slightly suppressed? Why is it on the low end? This is a guy who works out, who eats a good diet, eats plenty of calories, is healthy and active and fit, who has clinically low, almost clinically low testosterone, who has gained a lot of muscle. That doesn't jive. That's already a problem with his blood work. That doesn't make sense unless it was suppressed in some way. What could have caused it to be a little bit lower? Maybe some stuff he did in the past. But as Greg also pointed out, your testosterone level isn't indicative of if you're on something or not. Because you can go on a replacement dose of testosterone and your testosterone level stay steady. And as he pointed out, Tren, Deca, Anavar, none of that stuff will show as testosterone on your blood work. Now, he got one wrong. This is the one thing Greg got wrong. He said Boldenon, that's also Equipoise, EQ, that's a street name. Boldenon should show as testosterone, depending upon the test, because it is a testosterone derivative. It's a reduced testosterone. Dianabol will, if you've taken it, the same day as the test, will usually show also as testosterone on your blood work. So just a little snafu there, because they are testosterone derivatives, they'll show as testosterone. But Trenbolone won't. So as he pointed out, if you were taking, say, 100 milligrams a test, which might put you down at 330 to 400, right? Because 100 milligrams is a small amount and everything else is suppressed. You would read that way, and if you were pinning a gram of Tren or a gram of Deca or whatever else with it every week, your testosterone levels would read the same. They wouldn't go up. So all that tells you is that he's not using a bunch of testosterone-based substances. He could be using norandrones. He could be using DHT-derived substances. He could be using all sorts of stuff, and it will still be there. As he also pointed out, he could be using growth hormone. He could be using MK677, IGF-1, all of those things, and it will not show as testosterone on your blood work. And those are the non-androgens, but even the other androgens, they won't read that way. You might need to see their DHT read. You might see a guy who all of a sudden his testosterone might be on the low end, but his DHT is, I don't know, 100 times the reference range. Well, that could be Masteron or Anavar or Winstrol, right? They could be any of those. That might show the DHT being up, because that might be how they read, because they're based off of that as their parent hormone. But the whole point is a person could be using a bunch of anabolics. He'd be using a bunch of tren, a lot of tren, and it won't make their testosterone go up even 1% on the blood work. So that again, that's not a valid defense. And it's like that was a total lie, total cop-outs, total nonsense. And Greg basically called him on it. It's just a bold-faced liar. And you know what? That's totally fair. That's reasonable. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.